I never thought I'd be standing here, staring at Dad's old combine harvester 3 months after we buried him. The red paint had faded to a dusty orange, and rust spots dotted the metal like freckles on an old man's hands. But she still ran, just like Dad always said she would. The annual Millbrook Harvest Festival was coming up in 2 weeks, and with it, the traditional combine race that Dad had won 7 times. I'd been avoiding the machine since the funeral, but Mom kept insisting I should enter this year. "It's what he would have wanted," she'd say, her voice carrying that particular weight that comes with fresh grief. I ran my hand along the worn steering wheel, remembering countless hours spent beside Dad in this very seat. He'd taught me everything about farming in this cab: how to read the weather, when to plant, when to harvest, and most importantly, how to respect the land that fed us. The sound of gravel crunching under tires made me turn. Marcus pulled up in his shiny new pickup truck, the one he'd bought after the divorce was finalized. My sister Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her face turned away from me as usual. They'd been together for 2 years now, and the awkwardness hadn't faded. Marcus stepped out, his designer boots looking ridiculous against the farmyard dirt. He surveyed the combine with a smirk that I'd grown to hate over the past few months. "Still planning to embarrass yourself at the festival, Jake?" he called out, his voice dripping with the condescension that had driven my sister away from our family gatherings. I didn't answer. Some conversations weren't worth having, especially with Marcus. But as I watched him circle the combine like a vulture, I had no idea that his next words would change everything. Marcus stopped directly in front of me, his arms crossed over his expensive polo shirt. Sarah finally looked up from the truck, her expression unreadable behind her sunglasses. The tension between us had been building for months, ever since he'd started making comments about Dad's outdated farming methods at family dinners. "You know what would be really entertaining?" Marcus said, his voice carrying across the quiet farmyard. "If I entered the race too. Show this town what a real machine can do." I felt my jaw tighten. "You don't even farm, Marcus." "Don't need to. I've got money, and money buys better equipment," he gestured toward his truck. "I could have a brand new combine delivered by next week. Something with GPS, air conditioning, the works. Make your dad's antique look like the museum piece it is." The words hit harder than he probably intended. This wasn't just about farming equipment. This was about everything Dad had built, everything our family had worked for over 3 generations. Marcus saw it all as something to be improved upon, modernized, or worse, discarded. "The race isn't about having the newest equipment," I said quietly. "Isn't it, though?" Marcus stepped closer. "Face it, Jake. Your dad was stuck in the past, and so are you. This whole farm is living on borrowed time. Sarah and I have been talking about what to do with her inheritance." That last part felt like a punch to the gut. Sarah owned 1/3 of the farm now, thanks to Dad's will. If she and Marcus decided to sell— "The race is in 2 weeks, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "You want to embarrass yourself, go ahead." Marcus grinned. "Oh, I won't be the one getting embarrassed. See you at the starting line, brother-in-law." As they drove away, I realized I'd just accepted a challenge that was about much more than a simple race. That evening, I found myself back in the barn with the combine, a toolbox at my feet, and Dad's old maintenance manual spread across a hay bale. The familiar smell of motor oil and old leather brought back a flood of memories I'd been trying to keep at bay. I was 12 when Dad first let me drive the combine during harvest. My feet barely reached the pedals, and I had to sit on 2 cushions to see over the steering wheel. But Dad's patient voice guided me through every turn, every adjustment. "She's not just a machine, Jake," he'd said, his weathered hand covering mine on the controls. "She's a partner. Treat her right, and she'll never let you down." Now, as I checked the oil and inspected the belts, I could almost hear his voice again. The combine needed work, more than I'd initially thought. The hydraulic system was sluggish, the engine ran rough, and the cutting header had seen better decades. But underneath all the wear and tear, I could feel the solid bones of good engineering. I spent the next 3 hours going through every system, making notes of what needed attention. It would take most of my savings to get her race ready, money I'd been planning to use for new seed next spring. But as I worked, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about beating Marcus anymore. Around midnight, I called my old friend Tommy, who ran the implement repair shop in town. "Jake, everything okay?" "I need a favor, Tommy, a big one." "Name it." "I need to get Dad's combine ready for the harvest race, 2 weeks. There was a pause. "That's a tall order, buddy. She's been sitting a while." "I know, but I have to try." Another pause, then. "Your dad was good to me when I was starting out. Bring her by tomorrow morning. We'll see what we can do." Word spread quickly through Millbrook about the upcoming race between Marcus and me. By the time I brought the combine to Tommy's shop the next morning, half the town seemed to know about it. What surprised me was how many people stopped by to offer help. Old Pete Morrison, who'd farmed the land next to ours for 40 years, showed up with a set of nearly new hydraulic hoses. "Had these left over from my spring maintenance," he said gruffly, though I suspected he'd bought them specifically for us. "Mrs. Henderson from the diner brought coffee and sandwiches for everyone working on the combine. Your father helped my boy get his first job," she explained when I tried to pay her. "This is the least I can do." Even Father Mackenzie stopped by, not to offer mechanical help, but to share stories about Dad's quiet generosity over the years. I learned things I'd never known, how Dad had anonymously paid for the church's new roof, how he'd quietly helped struggling families during bad harvest years. Tommy worked with the dedication of a man on a mission. He rebuilt the hydraulic system, tuned the engine until it purged like a contented cat, and somehow managed to find replacement parts for components I thought were beyond repair. "Your dad brought this combine to me for service every year for 23 years, Tommy said as we worked late into the evening. "Never missed an appointment, always paid on time, always said please and thank you. That means something." By the end of the week, the combine looked better than it had in years. The engine ran smooth, the hydraulics responded crisply, and Tommy had even managed to touch up the worst of the rust spots. But more importantly, I was beginning to understand something I'd missed before. This wasn't just my fight. The whole town was invested in this race, and it had nothing to do with winning or losing. The following Monday, a massive truck rolled down Main Street carrying the biggest, most modern combine harvester I'd ever seen. It was Marcus's entry into the race, a $250,000 machine that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie rather than a wheat field. I was having coffee at Henderson's diner when the truck passed by, and the entire restaurant fell silent. The combine was pristine white and green, with an air-conditioned cab that looked more like a luxury car interior than farm equipment. GPS antennas bristled from the roof, and the cutting header was wide enough to harvest 3 rows at once. "Well," said Pete Morrison from the booth behind me, "that's quite a machine." Marcus had rented it from a dealership in the state capital, along with an operator to teach him the basics. For the next week, he practiced in the fields behind his new house, the one he'd bought with the money from his tech company sale. The sound of that modern engine carried across the valley, a constant reminder of what I was up against. But something interesting happened as the week progressed. Instead of being intimidated, the townspeople seemed to rally even more around Dad's old combine. Farmers who hadn't spoken to each other in years started stopping by Tommy's shop to check on our progress. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the race, focusing on the history of Dad's combine and its 7 victories. Sarah showed up at the farm on Thursday evening. It was the first time she'd been back since the funeral, and seeing her standing in the farmyard brought back memories of when we were kids, before life got complicated. "I wanted to see the combine," she said quietly. We walked to the barn together, not talking much. When she saw the restored machine, she ran her hand along the same spot where I'd touched it that first day. "He loved this old thing," she said. "Yeah, he did. Marcus thinks I should sell my share of the farm." I'd been expecting this conversation, but it still hit hard. "What do you think?" She was quiet for a long time. "I don't know anymore." The night before the race, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the barn around midnight and found myself sitting in the combine's cab, hands on the steering wheel, trying to channel some of Dad's confidence. The machine smelled like fresh oil and old memories. I thought about all the races Dad had won, how he'd made it look effortless. He never talked much about strategy or technique. For him, it was about understanding the land, reading the conditions, and trusting his instincts. "The machine is just a tool," he used to say. "The real work happens up here," and he'd tap his temple. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the gravel outside. I looked out to see Sarah approaching the barn, a thermos in her hands. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, climbing up into the cab beside me. "Too much thinking." She poured coffee from the thermos and handed me a cup. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, like we used to when we were kids hiding from chores. "I remember when Dad taught you to drive this thing," she said eventually. "You were so proud. I was terrified. You didn't show it." She paused. "Marcus doesn't understand what this place means. To him, it's just land and equipment, assets to be optimized." "And to you?" She looked around the cab, touching the worn armrests, the faded gauges. "It's home. It's Dad. It's everything we grew up believing in." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've been so angry since the divorce, so hurt. I wanted to hurt everyone back, including you." "Sarah," let me finish. "Tomorrow, when you're out there racing, you won't just be representing yourself. You'll be representing all of us. Dad, this farm, this way of life, and I want you to know that I'll be cheering for you." We hugged then, the first real embrace we'd shared since Dad's funeral. Whatever happened in the race, I'd already won something important back. The morning of the Harvest Festival dawned clear and bright, with just enough breeze to keep the dust down. I arrived at the festival grounds early, wanting to get the combine positioned and checked before the crowds arrived. The race course was a mile-long loop through the Hendricks wheat field, with hay bales marking the turns and a grandstand set up for spectators. Marcus's rented combine was already there, gleaming in the morning sun like a technological monument. A small crew of technicians swarmed around it, making final adjustments and checking systems. Marcus himself stood nearby in spotless overalls that still had the store creases, talking to a reporter from the county newspaper. I parked Dad's combine next to the starting line and began my own pre-race inspection. The engine sounded strong, the hydraulics responded smoothly, and the cutting header was sharp and ready. Tommy appeared at my elbow with a final cup of coffee and a worried expression. "She's running as good as she ever has," he said. "But Jake, that machine over there..." He gestured toward Marcus's combine. "It's got computer-controlled everything. GPS guidance, automatic header height adjustment, variable speed drives. It's like comparing a horse to a rocket ship." "Dad won 7 races with this horse," I reminded him. "Your dad was special. He had instincts that can't be taught." As the morning progressed, the grandstand filled with townspeople. I saw faces I'd known all my life. Farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, retirees. Mrs. Henderson waved from the front row, and Pete Morrison gave me a thumbs up. Even Father Mackenzie was there, probably planning to pray for both of us. The race wasn't scheduled to start until noon, but already I could feel the weight of expectation. This had become about more than just 2 men and their machines. It had become a symbol of something larger, tradition versus progress, community versus individual achievement, heart versus technology. At 11:30, the race officials called us for the final briefing. The race rules were simple: 1 lap around the course, cutting a swath of wheat as we went. The winner would be determined by a combination of speed and the quality of the harvest. No point in being fast if you left half the grain behind. Each combine would be followed by a judge on an ATV to monitor the cutting quality. Marcus climbed into his machine with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted the outcome. The rented combine's engine started with a whisper-quiet hum, all its systems coming online with digital precision. Dashboard screens displayed everything from fuel consumption to optimal cutting speed. I settled into Dad's familiar cab and turned the key. The old engine coughed once, then roared to life with a sound that had been echoing across these fields for decades. No computer screens here, just analog gauges, worn controls, and the kind of mechanical feedback that you felt in your bones. The starter raised his flag, and the crowd fell silent. I could see Sarah in the grandstand, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Next to her, Marcus's friends from the city looked confident, some of them already taking pictures with their phones. "Gentlemen," the starter called out, "this is for the Millbrook Harvest Festival Championship. May the best farmer win." The flag dropped. Marcus shot forward immediately, his modern combine accelerating smoothly across the field. The GPS guidance system kept him in a perfectly straight line while the automatic header adjusted continuously to maintain optimal cutting height. He was already 50 yards ahead before I'd even found my rhythm. But as Dad always said, races aren't won in the first 100 yards. I settled into the combine's natural pace, feeling the machine's personality through the steering wheel and listening to the engine's voice. The wheat was thick and golden, perfect for harvesting, and I could hear the satisfying sound of grain flowing into the hopper. Halfway through the first turn, something interesting happened. Marcus's combine, for all its technological superiority, began to struggle with the uneven ground. The Hendricks field had a reputation among local farmers. It looked flat from a distance, but it was full of subtle dips and rises that could challenge even experienced operators. Dad had always said it was a field that rewarded patience and punished haste. Marcus's combine, guided by GPS and automated systems, was designed for perfectly level, uniform fields. As he hit the first series of hidden dips, the machine began to work against itself. The automatic header kept adjusting for ground that the sensors couldn't quite read, causing it to scalp some areas while missing grain in others. I watched his cutting pattern from behind, seeing the telltale signs of an inexperienced operator fighting his equipment. The combine would surge forward, then slow abruptly as the systems tried to compensate for conditions they weren't programmed to handle. Dad's old combine, meanwhile, felt like an extension of my own body. Every bump and dip in the field came through the steering wheel and seat, giving me the feedback I needed to adjust my speed and header height manually. The machine and I moved together, reading the land the way Dad had taught me. By the halfway point, I'd closed the gap considerably. Marcus was still ahead, but his cutting quality was suffering. I could see grain being left behind, stalks being cut too high, and in some spots, the header was digging into the dirt. The crowd in the grandstand was on its feet now, cheering both of us on. But I noticed something else. Many of the farmers were pointing at the cutting patterns, shaking their heads at the waste they were seeing from the modern machine. As we approached the final turn, Marcus made a critical error. Frustrated by his machine's performance, he pushed the speed too high for the conditions. The combine lurched forward, the header dug deep, and suddenly he was stuck, the machine's weight causing it to sink into a soft spot that every local farmer knew to avoid. I slowed as I passed him, our eyes meeting through the cab windows. For just a moment, I saw something in his expression that surprised me. Not anger or frustration, but genuine respect. As I took the lead, I could hear the crowd's excitement building. The finish line was only a quarter-mile away, and barring any mechanical problems, Dad's old combine was going to win. But as I crested the small hill before the final straight stretch, I glanced back and saw Marcus still struggling with his stuck machine. The race officials were approaching on their ATVs, probably to offer assistance or declare him out of the race. but something made me slow down, then stop completely. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, thinking about what Dad would do in this situation. The answer came to me clearly. Dad never would have left anyone stranded in a field, race or no race. I turned the combine around and headed back toward Marcus. The crowd fell silent, confused by what they were seeing. Through the radio, I could hear the race officials asking what I was doing. When I reached Marcus's machine, I could see him through the cab window, his face red with embarrassment and frustration. He'd shut off the engine and was just sitting there staring at his hands. I positioned Dad's combine in front of his and climbed down. Marcus opened his door as I approached. "What are you doing?" he asked. "What Dad would have done," I said, pulling a tow chain from my toolbox. "Help a neighbor." For a moment, Marcus just stared at me. Then, quietly, "Why?" "Because that's what farmers do." It took 10 minutes to get his combine unstuck. The modern machine came free with a lurch, and Marcus was able to restart the engine. We were both covered in mud and grain dust, and the race was essentially over. There was no way either of us could complete the course now. But as we stood there in the field, something had changed between us. The anger and resentment that had poisoned our relationship seemed to have evaporated, replaced by something I hadn't expected: understanding. "I'm sorry," Marcus said suddenly. "About everything. About the things I said about your dad, about the farm, about this whole race." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the arrogant outsider I'd been fighting, but a man who was trying to find his place in a world he didn't fully understand. The race officials declared the event a draw, but nobody seemed to care about the official results. As Marcus and I drove our combines back to the starting area, the crowd was on its feet, applauding not for a winner, but for something more important. Sarah was waiting for us at the finish line, tears streaming down her face. She hugged me first, then surprised everyone by hugging Marcus too. "I'm proud of both of you," she said. The festival organizers didn't quite know what to do with a race that ended in mutual assistance rather than victory, but the crowd's reaction told them everything they needed to know. This had become something bigger than a competition. It had become a demonstration of the values that held the community together. Pete Morrison was the first to reach us, his weathered face split by a huge grin. "That," he said, shaking both our hands, "was the finest piece of farming I've seen in 40 years. Mrs. Henderson appeared with coffee and sandwiches, as if she'd been expecting this outcome all along. "Your father would be proud," she told me, then turned to Marcus. "And you, young man, you learned something important today." Marcus nodded, still processing what had happened. "I thought this was about proving something," he said, "about showing that new was better than old, that technology could beat experience." "And now?" I asked. "Now I think I understand what Sarah's been trying to tell me about this place. It's not about the equipment or the technology. It's about the people and the values they share." As the afternoon wore on, the festival continued around us. But the race had become the defining moment. Children who had watched from the grandstand were already retelling the story, and I knew it would become part of the town's folklore. Tommy appeared at my elbow, grinning from ear to ear. "Your dad's combine ran perfect," he said, "but more importantly, you drove it like he would have." That evening, as the festival wound down, Marcus approached me one more time. "I want to learn," he said, "about farming, about this community, about what really matters here. Would you teach me?" 3 months later, Marcus was back on the farm, but this time as a student rather than a critic. He'd returned the rented combine and instead asked if he could help with the fall harvest using Dad's machine. Sarah had decided not to sell her share of the farm after all, and the three of us were working together to plan for the next growing season. Marcus turned out to be a quick learner when he approached farming with humility instead of arrogance. He listened carefully to the old-timer's advice, asked thoughtful questions, and wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. The expensive clothes had been replaced by work boots and overalls that actually got used. "I spent my whole career thinking that newer was automatically better," he told me one evening as we serviced the combine together. In tech, that's usually true. But farming is different. There's wisdom in these old methods, knowledge that took generations to accumulate. The combine had become a bridge between us, a shared project that required both of us to contribute. Marcus brought his analytical mind to bear on maintenance schedules and efficiency improvements, while I shared the intuitive knowledge that Dad had passed down to me. Sarah watched our growing partnership with amazement and relief. The family that had been fractured by divorce and grief was slowly healing, bound together by shared work and common purpose. The town had noticed the change too. Marcus was no longer seen as an outsider trying to impose his will, but as someone genuinely trying to understand and contribute to the community. He joined the volunteer fire department, helped with the church's fundraising dinner, and even started attending the weekly coffee gatherings at Henderson's Diner. "You know," Pete Morrison said one morning over coffee, "I was wrong about that boy. He's got good instincts once he learned to listen to them." The harvest that year was one of the best in memory, and when it came time for the next festival, Marcus and I entered as a team, taking turns operating Dad's combine in a relay race format. We didn't win. That honor went to the Hendricks brothers and their matching John Deeres. But we had something more valuable than a trophy. As winter settled over the farm, Marcus and I spent long evenings in the barn working on the combine and planning for spring. The machine had become more than just equipment to both of us. It was a symbol of continuity, of values that transcended technology and progress. "I keep thinking about that day," Marcus said one snowy evening as we replaced worn belts. "When you came back to help me, I was so sure you'd just drive away and claim your victory." "For a minute, I thought about it," I admitted. "But then I heard Dad's voice in my head, reminding me what really mattered." "What did he say?" "That farming isn't a competition against each other. It's a collaboration with the land and the community. We succeed together or we fail together." Marcus was quiet for a while, running his hand along the combine's worn steering wheel. "I wish I'd known him better. Your dad, I mean. Sarah always said he was special, but I thought she was just being sentimental." "He would have liked you," I said, "once you learned to listen." "How can you be sure?" "Because he believed people could change, could grow. He said the best farmers were the ones who never stopped learning." That winter, Marcus threw himself into learning everything he could about agriculture. He read farming journals, attended extension service workshops, and spent hours talking with the older farmers in town. But more importantly, he learned to see the farm through Sarah's eyes, not as a business to be optimized, but as a legacy to be preserved and passed on. When spring arrived, we planted together, Marcus operating the old tractor while I handled the planter. The sight of him carefully following the contours of the field, respecting the natural flow of the land, would have made Dad proud. Sarah often joined us in the evenings, the three of us sitting on the porch and planning the future. The farm that had once seemed destined for division was now stronger than ever, supported by three different perspectives united by common purpose. "I have an idea," Sarah said one evening. "What if we started offering farm tours? Show people what real farming looks like, let them experience this way of life." A year later, the Millbrook Harvest Festival had grown into something special. Word had spread about the previous year's race, and people came from neighboring counties to see the farm where cooperation had triumphed over competition. Sarah's farm tour idea had blossomed into a full educational program, with Marcus using his business skills to help market and organize the visits. Dad's combine had become the centerpiece of the tours, lovingly maintained and still working the fields. Visitors loved hearing the story of the race, but more importantly, they came to understand the values that made farming communities special. On the morning of the new Harvest Festival, I found myself once again standing beside the combine. But this time, I wasn't alone. Marcus was there too, along with Sarah and her 2 young children, my new nephew and niece who called the farm home. "Uncle Jake," my nephew asked, "will you teach me to drive the combine like Grandpa taught you?" I looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "When you're old enough," I promised, "and Uncle Marcus will help." The race that year was different. Instead of individual competition, it had evolved into a community celebration where multiple generations worked together. Marcus and I operated Dad's combine as a team, while other families did the same with their equipment. As we completed our lap around the familiar course, I could feel Dad's presence in the cab with us. The combine ran smoothly, the harvest was good, and the community was strong. Everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in, was being carried forward. After the race, as the festival continued around us, Marcus pulled me aside. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For showing me what really matters, for giving me a chance to be part of something bigger than myself." As the sun set over the golden fields, I realized that Dad's greatest victory hadn't been any of his 7 race wins. It had been the values he'd instilled, the community he'd helped build, and the legacy that would continue long after all of us were gone. The old combine would keep running, season after season, carrying forward the wisdom of generations and the promise of harvests yet to come. Thank you so much for listening to this story about family, forgiveness, and the values that bind communities together. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from, and if this story reminded you of your own family traditions or community experiences. If you enjoyed this tale of how an old combine harvester brought people together, please consider subscribing to the channel for more heartwarming stories that celebrate the power of human connection and the importance of preserving what truly matters. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest victories come not from beating others, but from lifting them up.